myself. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here and thank you for my introduction. Today I will present my article called Information Structure Across Languages, Rheme Identification among Czech and Slovak English learners and native English speakers. This cross-linguistic study explores how Czech and Slovak English learners, as well as native English speakers, identify rhemetic elements. Rhemetic elements, or rhemes, are parts of sentences that carry the most communicative weight. They are most informative, most important in the sentence, and we will look at how sentence structure influences the perception of what is new or important in the sentence. Let's take a look at overview. So this slide outlines the presentation structure. We begin with introduction to theoretical framework, which is functional sentence perspective, or FSP. I will include its key terms such as theme, transition, rheme, communicative dynamism. Then I will contrast sentence structures in Czech, Slovak, and English. And next, I will explain my methodology, show the main findings, some results, pedagogical implications for second language learning. So let's talk about what is functional sentence perspective, because you need to understand that a little bit to understand my research. So FSP analyzes how information is distributed in a sentence. Each part of a sentence carries different degree of communicative importance or dynamism or weight. The theme, which will be color-coded green, also in next slides, contains known information. Transition, which is yellow-orange, connects the theme to what follows next. So it carries like a medium level of information. And the rheme introduces a new or context-independent content, so it's the element that moves the communication forward. Also, please don't forget that rheme will be colored red in next slides, it will be important. So communicative dynamism measures how much a sentence element contributes to advocating the flow of the communication. It means that which sentence elements drive message forward in a sentence. Theme has lowest communicative dynamism. The information is usually known, which means it's context dependent. Rheme has highest communicative dynamism. That means information is new, important, usually context independent. This principle helps us understand sentence processing, especially in languages that rely on different organizational rules. So here is a sentence broken down by its FSP elements, so I don't just talk about theory, but also show you some application. I actually used a sentence from my survey, which I will talk about in a few minutes. The villagers of Little Hangleton still called it the Riddle House. So as you can see, the villagers of Little Hangleton and it are both the theme with the lowest degree of CD. Still cold is transition, which has medium degree of CD, and the Riddle House, which moves the communication forward, which is the newest information, has highest degree of CD. So this illustrates how English can segment sentences in terms of communicative focus. Let's now talk about Czech and Slovak versus English word order. Before I talk about that, I think I need to point out or note that Czech and Slovak are sister languages, and they are as close as two languages can get. So grammar, vocabulary, even pronunciation are very similar, which also means that Slovak student can understand Czech text perfectly, and vice versa, of course. So let's now talk about about word order principles. English has rigid subject, verb, object word order, which means that the leading word order principle is grammatical principle. That means that English permits non-final rhymes. How so? Well, if the most important part of the sentence has to be subject because of the grammatical rules, it will stand at the beginning of the sentence. However, this doesn't happen in Czech and Slovak. Czech and Slovak, they have flexible word order, they have a lot of inflection, and they prioritize linearity principle, which you could understand as the principle of end focus and weight. That means that rheme will always be at the end of the sentence because flexible word order will allow it. Yes, so that means that Czech and Slovak don't typically permit non-final Rhemes. Here again are some examples of how the same message can position the Rheme differently in English and Czech. On your left, you can see Rheme in final position in English text. I again used the sentence of, no, actually, you haven't seen this sentence yet, so let's take a look at it. The little Hangletons all agreed that the old house was creepy. As you can see, the Rheme is also at the end of the sentence in Czech version. Že starý dům jim nahání husí kůži. If we move to Rheme in the middle position in English sentence, half a century ago, something strange and horrible had happened. In Czech, again, it's at the end of the sentence. Něco podivného a hrůzného. If we take a look at Rheme in initial position, a man called Frank Bryce had just been arrested. Again, Franka Bryce is at the end of the sentence. These patterns actually motivated my hypothesis about first language influence on English Rheme interpretation and perception. I asked several key questions. First one is, do Czech and Slovak students tend to identify regardless of its actual information value, relative communicative dynamism, or importance within the discourse structure? Second question I asked is, do non-native English speakers perceive information structure differently from native speakers? And if so, to what extent can these differences be attributed to conventions rooted in their first languages? That means to conventions which will make English and Slovak speakers expect Rheme at the end of the sentence. And last question is, does the placement of the Rheme, final versus non-final Rheme, elicit systematically different interpretations from native and non-native participants? Let's talk a little bit about participants and the source text. I actually created or conducted 3 surveys. First 2 surveys, Survey A and Survey B, were filled in by non-native English speakers. They were Czech and Slovak first-year university students of English language and literature studying in Masaryk University. Half of them took Survey A, half of them took Survey B. I created 2 surveys because each survey, for example, Survey A had first half of the text written in English and second in the Czech language. Survey B had the order reversed, so the first half was in Czech language, second in English. I did it to have both English and Czech analysis of the sentences, and I switched the surveys and used different participants for both surveys for participants not to be affected by already reading the text in one language. The third survey, Survey C, used native English speakers. I collected 151 responses. The survey content was first paragraph from chapter 1 of Harry Potter and Goblet of Fire, written by J.K. Rowling. And answers which aligned with FSP theory were categorized as convergent. Answers deviating from FSP theory were labeled as divergent. I wanted to avoid calling them correct and wrong because by some speakers analyzing or deciding some part of sentence is most important doesn't necessarily mean they're wrong. It just means it deviates from FSP predicted results. It's important to note that no participant had training in FSP, so their responses reflect natural perception. Thus, the choice of first-year university students, because this is actually theory which students study on our university. In this slide, you can see the survey which participants took. On the left, you can see some introductory information about the survey, some instructions, and on the right side, you can see first 2 questions and options participants could choose from. Well, you probably know what is the correct answer in question 1, since I already showed it. It is indeed the Riddle House. But just being curious, could you guess what is the correct or convergent answer in the second question? Which of these units is Rheme? I'm talking namely about even though it had been many years since the Riddle family had lived there. So feel free to unmute yourselves or just guess in your heads or write into the chat. And we will see how correctly you analyzed the sentence based off FSP. So please, any tips? Well, I am pretty sure that most of you. Sorry?
Yeah, sorry, Emma. Would you like us to write the answers on the chat or?
Oh, if you want to, if you wish to, of
Okay.
course, there is no pressure. So I am sure that many of you already answered in your minds. So let me just say that if you chose, since the Riddle family had lived there, you chose correctly or convergently in accordance with FSP. Um, on this slide, you can see the full text participants had to analyze. It was divided into two shorter texts and then the sentences or clauses for convenience of both me and the participants. So right now you can see a survey native English speakers took because both parts are in English. But of course, for non-native speakers, first one of the parts would be in Czech. I'm not going to read it because we are short of time. So let's just move on to survey results. The next three slides compare how well participants identified Rhemes in final versus non-final positions using aggregated results from all three surveys. So as you can see, average and median and range between both non-native and native participants was pretty similar. The different also non-natives answered 23 answers convergently, 20 divergently. Natives answered 22 convergently, 21 divergently. So as you can see, also convergent is winning by a slight shade, but also you can see that non-natives and natives performed really similarly. Yeah, with a slight preference for convergent answers. Now, what is interesting? It starts to be interesting when we take a look at non-final reams versus final reams. So both non-natives and natives analyzed non-final ream divergently from 61 to 67%. And as you can see, these percentages kind of flip. So with final ream, non-natives answered convergently um, um, with 64 points or 64 percent, and so did natives again with 64%. So as you can see, the preference kind of flipped from divergent to convergent. Okay, let me now break down these numbers into bigger detail that I showed in previous slide. So in table 1, you can see each survey A and B, which are Czech and English. Survey C is just English. And you can see D which stands for divergent, C which stands for convergent, and NF which stands for non-final. So as you can see, there are very often all three groups responded very similarly, and all three groups had quite big problems with non-final grammatic sentences. Actually, out of 18 non-final grammatic sentences, out of these 43 sentences or questions, 13 were answered divergently, which is a lot. Okay, let me now move on to some pie charts which summarize the differences and data which I showed in previous slides. So on the top, on figures 1 and 2, you can see oh, non-natives and natives answering or analyzing final reams with 64% of convergent answers, whereas when they analyzed non-final reams, non-natives answered with 56% of divergent answers, and natives with 67% of convergent with 67% of divergent answers. So again, here you can see very clearly that the preference shifted quite notably between final and non-final reams, and that the difference between natives and non-natives wasn't very big. The difference in answers, of course. This indicates a clear pattern. When the rim is in expected final position, both groups align with FSP predictions, but when it's placed middle sentence or sentence initially, the majority of participants fail to recognize it as the most important unit, regardless of their first language or language of the text they are identifying the rim in. Yeah. This and next slide show some concrete examples and some most striking differences between native and non-native responses. In two cases, I displayed a final rim, in two cases, a non-final rim. So I'm just going to really quickly run through it. There was clause ivy spreading unchecked over its face. It's pretty interesting that half of the participants, non-native participants, thought that ivy is correct answer, and the other half thought it's unchecked. Whereas there is a really interesting preference for unchecked with native participants. When we have a sentence, the little Hangletons all agreed that the old house was creepy. For some reason, almost 26% of non-natives thought that the little Hangletons is a dream, even though the name of the village was mentioned many times before. When we take a look at a sentence had been embroidered in so many places, for some reason, 85.4% of natives thought embroidered is the correct dream, which it is. But non-natives, almost 43% of them believed that in so many places is the most important part of the sentence. When we take a look at the last example, every version of the tale, however, started in the same place. Again, there is interesting preference of natives to choose subject every version of the tale, with 57% of answers or responses. Let's move on to result. Answering the first research question, we expected that Czech and Slovak participants would perform better with Czech texts. This assumption was not confirmed because their performance was comparable, almost identical across both languages. Also, regarding the first research question, participants in all groups showed a strong preference for selecting the final unit as the rim. This reinforces the idea that final position bias is not solely due to Czech or Slovak language habits. Answering the second research question, the ratio of convergent and divergent answers was very similar across all language groups, which means that non-native speakers of English don't perceive the information structure of English text differently from native speakers. This was somewhat unexpected and shows that first language didn't dramatically affect performance on average. And also, regarding the second research question, we found that most divergent responses occurred in the sentences with mid-position reams. So as I already mentioned, out of 13 non-final ream sentences that received divergent evaluation, 8 had the ream positioned in the middle. So this indicates again that sentence structure, not some first language transfer, affects ream interpretation difficulty. Moving on to some pedagogical implications, I believe that second language instruction should raise learners' awareness of sentence focus and ream placement, because can students really understand English text fully if they cannot understand which part of the sentence is the most important? So I believe that teaching strategies could include some contrastive analysis between Czech and Slovak and English structures, and maybe their analysis of their communicative focus. Also, I think we should put explicit attention to non-final reams, and perhaps we could also enhance discourse-oriented language activities, which could help promote this way of thinking about sentence and text. Now let's move on to summary. To summarize, both native and non-native speakers struggle with non-final reams. Non-final reams are harder to detect regardless of first language. Final position reams are identified convergently more often, and native language plays a surprisingly small role in analysis. And I really believe that as teachers, we should enhance learners' awareness of Rheme positioning and the role of context and its communicative focus. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Rheme. Thank you very much for your fascinating comparative analysis. And I think as a PhD candidate for you, I think your work really bridges the gaps between linguistic theory and pedagogy. And thank you for
Thank you
that.
so much.
Yes. And yes, we would like to open the floor for questions now or comments. Any questions, any comments, any reflections from anyone? In the meantime, I think, Emma, I really think your work also resonates with Fatima's earlier work because you both, in a way, focus on strategic awareness. I think it's really interesting.
Thank you so much. There is, of course, much left unsaid, so if you're more interested in my research, feel free to read my article.
Sure, great.
There is bigger breakdown of especially the analysis, both not just quantities, but also like